everyone, Aimer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time, as we wind things down for the original series, we've got Season 7, Episode 21, which is called The Western. So this one starts out with two guys named Van Cleve and Matthew Royce out in the Nevada desert, admiring some artifacts they've stolen from a museum. Royce wants to be bought out and start a new life, and Cleve agrees. They shake on it. As Royce goes into a cave to set up their stash, Cleve activates a timing device and drives away, watching the cave collapse from an explosion. Jim gets instructions using spy speak from a park worker. The mission: Cleve and Royce murdered a guard during the theft, and the government wants to return the loot to its original country. Royce is presumed dead, but the IMF must recover the treasure and put Van Cleve behind bars. We have the usual type of apartment scene showing us some neat gadgetry and planning, with the IMF a bit more dressed down than normal. Cleve leaves his Florida hotel where two IMF guest operatives stage a weird accident where one of them acts drunk, bumping into Cleve while wearing a skeleton mask, then stumbles onto the road and is hit by a van driven by the other operative, quickly taking the mask off as Cleve looks on, seeing the vision of the skeleton in his mind and the dead man on the road. On his flight back to Nevada, Casey, saying that she's a psychology grad student, is seated next to Cleve and manipulates a deck of cards. She puts them back in her rigged purse, and when she opens it again, Cleve notes a large stack of money. Casey also mentions that she's a bad gambler, and Cleve says she's being modest as he noted the cash, but Casey opens the purse again and the money's not there. He invites her to dinner, and she thinks her luck may be changing. Casey suggested maybe he has premonitions of the future, which is something that she's studying. Cleve says he doesn't believe in such things. Jim and Barney, as government agents, start setting up equipment on Cleve's ranch, drawing warning shots from his men. They're brought to Cleve's house, explaining that they're doing a preliminary survey, and we're told he had been notified. Cleve presses him for details about it, and Barney throws a bunch of jargon at him. Cleve actually understands most of it and realizes the underlying message that his treasure hiding spot might be uncovered or otherwise at risk. Cleve asks a government official to dig into what's really going on, and it turns out that everything about the survey is marked top secret, but apparently he finds something out about Jim. At a casino that night, Jim loses big at Willie's roulette table as Barney and Cleve's man Ed watch. Barney spots Jim some money, but that disappears quickly too. Cleve arrives and tells Jim he's learned a lot about him. He's behind on child support, he has a bad gambling problem, and all sorts of other money issues. He offers Jim a solution to his money problems if he tells him what's really going on with the survey. Jim says he'll have to think about it. Cleve spots Casey winning huge at blackjack, and after she cashes out, her purse is exactly as he saw it on the plane. While they're at dinner, the rest of the IMF manage to get into the Cleve home and gaslight the house and his car with all sorts of gadgets and devices. Later, Casey and Cleve come there and have a painfully strained discussion about how his mind seems to be adept at analyzing things and projecting the future based on probabilities. Call those premonitions if you want. Casey keeps Cleve occupied so the IMF can finish their work, and outside we see a figure watching them and aiming a gun. Turns out it's Royce. His shot misses and he dashes away as Cleve and the IMF catch glimpses of him, but only from behind. Jim and Barney go after him, as do Cleve's men. Jim and Barney track him to an abandoned ghost town where a gunfight ensues, but Royce manages to get away. Cleve suspects it was Royce, and the IMF confirms it from fingerprints. Jim comes to visit Cleve, asking for $10,000 in exchange for his information. He says there have been a series of small earthquakes, but they are getting increasingly intense and likely to collapse a nearby dam, flooding the entire area. When Jim leaves, Barney activates a device causing the pool's water to start bubbling, and Cleve sees a dead dummy of himself rise from the water and then sink back down, and he considers that maybe he's having another premonition. Ed tells Cleve that maybe he should leave the house for a while, but Cleve says he's not going anywhere until he completes his business. The IMF activate their devices, causing tremors around the house and waking Cleve as a bulletin is heard about the quake as Jim described. Cleve heads out to his car, on which the IMF placed a tracker, and Royce's head pops up again near the pool as he follows, with Casey and Willie in an IMF van not far behind. Cleve heads to a cave not unlike the one we saw in the opening. Royce follows him in, with the IMF only a couple of steps behind. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this one a grade of F. I looked hard for anything really good that I could say about this episode. And boy, in this one, the writers did not make that easy. So much so that I really couldn't find it. Just to cover off the basics, as usual in these episodes, there is good teamwork. Ed Nelson as Cleve is a fine actor for what it's worth. I noted that again, the producers brought back the old suspense music while the IMF is gaslighting Cleve's house. That's the theme that we heard a lot back in the early seasons of the show, which was kind of neat. In terms of a callback, this one you don't have to go back too far. In the basics of the plot, this one takes me back just a few episodes ago to The Fountain. We have a plot that's basically based around making the Mark believe that he's having visions. And that's essentially the same thing that the IMF do in terms of gaslighting a person, and making him believe in the fountain of youth, that he's found it and he can use it to his advantage. This is somewhat more logical, as the IMFs lay a bit more of a foundation for what's going to happen. It not really the visions thing or the premonitions thing, but at least they establish that, okay, there's going to be earthquakes, you've got a dam nearby, there could be flooding. At least that's somewhat realistic compared to the fountain. The premonitions thing, though, is obviously not so realistic. So other than that, other than just the basics, I have really nothing good to say about this episode, unfortunately. I really can't even think of any potential there that I could point at and say, if they just kind of done this, it would have been better. There really isn't a whole heck of a lot here. The episode overall, moving on to the bad, really, is just plotty and slow. There's that whole conversation in the middle of the episode with Van Cleve and Casey, with is just basically all about psychobabble. Well, you're having premonitions because of this, and this is what's going on in your mind, and unconscious, and this and that, and this and that. And, my eyes were kind of glazing over at that one, because I'm like, come on, this is just a ridiculous waste of television time. Sadly, even the Ghost Town gunfight, which could kind of be considered at least a little bit of an action sequence in the episode, I'm going to be very, very kind here, and I'm going to say that, at best, that whole sequence was kind of meh. It was just something out of like an old Western. My dad used to watch a lot of those things, and I'm just like, how is this interesting? These guys are just like shooting at each other every 10 seconds or so, and nobody's really getting hit and nothing's going on. How is this the least bit, something that you'd want to watch? And I feel exactly like that here. It accomplishes nothing, and it takes up way too much TV time. So clearly there was not a lot of meat to this episode. There's certainly no new ground covered here. I think I've already mentioned that. All you have to do, as the IMF has done countless times before, is just convince the Mark to go after his stash, right? At the most basic level, I'll actually maybe go back and count them, but before I actually do go back and count, if we want to look at the basics of the plot, if you boil it down to the bare essentials, I would be willing to bet that around 80 to 85% of plots on this show are just surrounded by the idea of somebody has something, whether it be stuff or whether it be information, the IMF wants it, and the IMF just basically have to make the person go after it or manipulate them into giving the information up. That's what this show is about 80 to 85% of the time. I might be understating it, might be even more. And that's fine. That's what the show is about. But generally speaking, I think it's good when there's actually some difficulty involved, or when there's actually some risk involved that, hey, if we don't do this right, maybe this isn't going to work. Here, there is no difficulty. There is no risk. There is nothing, it seems, that can go wrong with this mission. The IMF have, what is essentially the perfect plan. Geography is on their side. This guy lives in a place where we can easily stage this. So there you go. I think that this is a perfect example of how the writers certainly in season 7, I think this has happened quite a bit. And the revival series, which we're getting to soon, is going to be guilty of that as well. How the writers often just kind of come up with an idea for a story of sorts. And then they're like, well, why don't we put it in this setting? And let's see how it plays out. Technically, you could have done this kind of story just about anywhere. But, okay, well, why don't we just put it in kind of a Western setting? We have access to a ghost town set and this and that and this and that. Oh, okay, whatever. Had it taken place, on the eastern seaboard, you could have still had the same basic plot. It could have happened in Europe. It could have happened anywhere around the world, right? And I feel, as I have in some episodes that have occurred now and some that will happen in the revival, that that's really what's going on. The writers are kind of covering up the fact that the story has really no or little meat to it, and to say, well, if we put it in this somewhat exotic, and I use heavy air quotes for that, exotic setting, well, that's going to make it a better story. A good example, it just occurred to me, is back in season 5, if you remember the episode Butterfly, where, it was ostensibly set in Japan. And I commented back then that that whole thing is just basically to cover up the fact that the story is pretty thin. And that's exactly what's going on here. So the story just plays itself out. The IMF wins in the end, almost as if all of the action or manipulation that happened in the last 40 minutes didn't really matter. And that really is kind of a waste. It really is kind of a yoink ending in a sense where it's like, okay, well, we got these two guys back to the stash and let's just come in with the guns and we got them. I was going to say that why didn't Cleve get his guys to come with him for protection? I guess that could kind of be explained away with the idea that he doesn't want them to know about the treasure because obviously he wants all the money for himself. I guess, yeah, you could kind of, that does make some sense. But given that, Matthew Royce is obviously still around, he's realized that, and he might take a shot at him, that seems really, really unwise. A lot of plot holes, I think, is a better way of putting that. Not really loose ends. There's a lot of, that's a big plot hole, and is very, very glaring. Matthew Royce as a wild card is ridiculously ineffective. I already alluded to the fact that the gunfight itself is just really, really pointless. It doesn't accomplish anything at all in terms of the story. It's just a way to fill in 5 television minutes. Something close to that. I didn't really keep track of the amount of time, but it certainly seemed like it took up a full 5 minutes. I wouldn't be surprised if it took up more. So, again, not the actor's fault, but the characters are just, put out that way. And that was really, really bad. Some wild cards have been really, really good. This one is not. I haven't even talked about Van Cleve as an antagonist. Certainly, he is completely lame, very predictable, easily manipulatable because of, what he's done and the stash that he has. I would say that unfortunately as a character, he's completely unengaging. Ed Nelson, who plays him, is a very prolific actor. But what can you really do with this character? There isn't a whole heck of a lot. There's really no opportunity for it. There could have been, the writers could have taken time out of that stupid psychobabble conversation or, the 5 minutes of this silly gunfight to do something, but they didn't. And yes, I would say that he's a schmuck too. For a very, very intelligent and obviously educated person, he gets fooled way too easily, despite coincidence and frankly a very, very pretty face in Casey, to say, oh wow, maybe I am really having premonition. Is he as lame a schmuck as Thomas Bachman from The Fountain? No. That's a whole other level, but boy, he's he's close. Anyway. It's just amazing to me that the writers would have us believe with this character, not only that he can be convinced that he's seeing the future as a fairly intelligent person, but that the IMF is able to freely gaslight this guy's house, even though he's hiding, obviously not at his house, but somewhere on his land, priceless stolen stuff. This guy should be really, really paranoid about everything. So his overconfidence and his pride, I guess, in a sense, that he thinks in a way that he's kind of untouchable. I'm speculating a little bit, but that's how it comes across to me. This is another reason that the IMF can manipulate him so easily. This is a guy who should have his protection around him at all times. Him telling, Ed, his second in command, that, tell the guys to go to sleep now. I guess it'll be okay. No, buddy, a guy just took a shot at you, okay? What makes you think that he's not coming back? Come on. I don't get it. I really, really don't. Could be a bit of a macho thing. I can't really get bothered into kind of trying to analyze that. It's not really that important, frankly. And I don't think I have a whole heck of a lot more to say about this episode. I think I understand what the writers were trying to do. This was, I believe, the second last one that they did just before the pendulum, which we had last time, which was actually the last one that was filmed. And again, can't really help it. They were just kind of playing out the string, I guess, and just said, well, we've got to pump out some episodes, and here's one idea. Okay, sure, let's try this. That's how it seems to me. Anyway, I think that's about it. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. We've got one left in terms of the review, and then I'm coming up with some ideas for some best of, some top 10 or however many numbers I can come up with, lists and things like that. And I'm kind of looking forward to that. And I am also looking forward to getting to the revival. Please like this episode video review. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments about this and other episodes. Thank you again, and I will see you next time for the last of the original reviews for episode 22 called Imitation. See you then.